Winter pressed itself across the frontier like a long, slow exhale, settling into every crack of the land, until even the bravest creatures moved with hesitation. Snow clung to the old Finch homestead in soft, uneven folds, and smoke rose from its chimney in a thin gray ribbon, the only sign that the place was still alive. Elara Finch, 23 and quiet as a kept secret, stepped out onto her porch, wrapping her patched shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her breath drifted into the frozen morning, quick and pale. She had survived 3 winters alone already, but the 4th arrived with a weight she could not yet name. The world around her looked peaceful, but peace often disguised what lingered beneath it. The wind carried warnings if one listened. She always listened. She had learned to, not only for the coyotes that circled closer each year or the distant gunfire from passing riders, but for the memories that rose uninvited whenever silence settled too deep. She swept snow from the porch with slow strokes, remembering the voices that used to fill this place. The parents carried by fever, the neighbors who moved on when the mines failed, and the suitor who once promised her warmth but left her with words colder than any December night. Clive Merrick had ridden to her gate once, straight-backed and puffed with self-importance. His smile had been bright enough then, though even sunlight could hide sharp edges. He had liked her quietness at first, mistaking it for obedience. He had spoken of shared futures, tidy kitchens, and the way a woman ought to fit into a man's life. But when she refused to shrink to those expectations, he had turned cruel, as if her independence was an insult carved just for him. She had ended their courtship with a trembling voice, and he had responded with a dismissal delivered before half the town. Not worth the trouble. His words lived in her bones like frost. She pushed the memory aside as she picked up a small bucket from the porch. Her well had frozen the night before, and she would need to break the thin ice again. Every step toward the water felt heavier than the last, as though winter itself tried to keep her from moving forward. Still, she made her way across the yard, boots creaking in the snow. Her life depended on small triumphs, drawing water, tending the stove, keeping loneliness from turning into despair. These tasks kept her upright. They kept her breathing. The well stood beside an oak tree stripped bare of leaves. She brushed away the dusting of snow from the wooden frame, set the bucket aside, and reached for the rope. Her gloved hand paused. Something about the snow at her feet looked disturbed, not by wind or wandering livestock, but by something heavier. Footprints. Not quite booted. Wider. Deeper. As if someone had stood there, watching her house long enough for the snow to settle in strange patterns around them. Elara bent slightly, letting her fingertips hover over the impressions. They were not fresh, maybe a day or 2 old. But they were deliberate. Cautious. Whoever had walked there had not approached the porch, only lingered at a distance. She scanned the tree line, heartbeat edging faster. Nothing moved except branches shaking off frost. The prints filled her with an unease she could not name, because it wasn't exactly fear, just an awareness, like the world had shifted a fraction toward something unfamiliar. She lowered the bucket into the well, letting the rope unwind until she heard the sharp kiss of water. The sound grounded her. She turned the crank and pulled, muscles straining against cold air. The bucket emerged full, sloshing gently. She carried it back to the cabin, the footprints still pressing on her thoughts. Something had been there. Watching. Waiting. Yet she had survived long enough to trust her instincts, and her instincts told her the presence had not been threatening. Inside, the warmth of the small cabin wrapped itself around her. She set the bucket near the stove, lit the last dry pieces of wood she had, and listened to them crackle. The firelight played on the walls, illuminating the simple life she clung to: worn blankets, mended clothes, a chipped mug she refused to throw away because it had been her mother's. She sat near the hearth and let her hands thaw, feeling the familiar ache of solitude press inside her ribs. People often thought she preferred the quiet, but the truth was gentler and sadder. Quiet was merely the only companion that stayed. A creak sounded outside. Not the wind. Not the old boards settling. Something heavier. Elara stiffened, breath-catching. She moved to the window carefully, and lifted the curtain by a threadbare corner. Snow swirled in the yard, but the shape near the fence was unmistakable. A rider, tall and unmoving, his silhouette cut against the whiteness like a piece of night left behind. No horse. Just a man standing perfectly still. Her heart pounded. She stepped back, gripping the edge of the table. The rider did not move closer. Instead, he turned slightly, as though listening to something she couldn't hear. After a long moment, he walked toward the trees, disappearing into them with a graceful, silent strength. She wanted to believe he was just a traveler seeking his path, but the prince she had found earlier told a different story. He had been here before, and she doubted he would vanish so easily for good. The rest of the day passed in a haze of uneasy chores. She chopped wood with stiff arms, checked her traps for rabbits, and swept the floors that would only gather dust again. Yet her thoughts drifted repeatedly to the quiet rider. His presence lingered like a shadow she could not brush away. When evening settled, she lit a lantern and stepped outside to secure the shutters against the coming storm. The sky roiled with heavy clouds, dimming the light until the world seemed carved from charcoal. As she fastened the last latch, she felt it again, that sensation of being observed. Not hunted. Not threatened. Simply seen. She turned slowly toward the tree line. The faintest movement rippled between the pines. A figure. Broad-shouldered. Bare from the waist up despite the cold. Snow steamed against his skin as if winter melted when it touched him. For a moment, she wondered if he was a trick of the dimming light, a fevered imagining of a lonely mind. But then he looked directly at her. The distance between them swallowed his features, but something in the shape of him, stillness, certainty, presence, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She could move. She could call out. She could run back inside. She did none of those things. Instead, she stood on the porch as if rooted there, unable to tear herself from the gaze that held her without force. Then, just as quietly as he had appeared, he stepped back into the pines, the shadows taking him in like an old friend. Alara exhaled shakily, every part of her alert yet strangely calm. She closed the door, slid the bolt, and leaned her forehead against the wood. Something had begun in the winter dusk, something she did not understand but could no longer ignore. The rider had not come to harm her. He had come because something was coming for her. And she was no longer certain she would face the fourth winter alone. Winter deepened its grip on the land by the time Alara ventured outside again, and the snow beneath her boots felt denser, as if holding a memory of all the footsteps that had trespassed near her homestead. She kept glancing toward the pines, expecting the silent figure to reappear, though she told herself it was foolish to hope for anything from a stranger. Still, the thought of him lingered in her mind with a strange warmth that belonged to no winter morning. She carried an armful of firewood toward the chopping block, intending to split enough to last the week. The axe handle felt slick beneath her numb fingers, and she tightened her grip before raising it overhead. The moment she swung, a sharp jolt ran up her arm, and the tool slipped from her grasp. It clattered to the ground with a dull thud. Alara stumbled, tried to steady herself, and felt her knees buckle. Before she could fall, a shadow swept across her vision. A large hand, warm, impossibly steady, caught her elbow and lifted her effortlessly upright. She gasped, breath tangling in the cold air, and found herself staring up into the face of the man who had been watching her from the trees. He stood taller than any man she had known, shoulders broad, chest bare despite the bitter cold, skin bronzed and marked with faint scars that spoke of battles fought far from her quiet life. His long dark hair fell loosely around his face, snowflakes melting as they touched him. His eyes, dark as winter soil, held a calm she felt rather than understood. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Alara felt the heat of his touch through the sleeve of her coat, though he released her as soon as she found her balance. He stepped back with a grace that seemed at odds with his immense strength. "You fall," he said softly, his voice carrying an accent that shaped the words with gentle precision. "Snow make ground tricky." She swallowed, unsure whether to thank him or step away. Instead, she simply nodded, unable to form anything that resembled speech. Her pulse hammered in her ears, but no fear rose in her chest, only a trembling uncertainty. He studied her as though measuring her well-being, then pointed toward the abandoned axe. "Careful," he murmured. "Winter not kind." Alara knelt to retrieve it, her gloved hands shaking. When she stood again, he had already put a small distance between them, giving her space she had not realized she needed. She wanted to ask his name, to understand why he had been near her home before dawn, and now again without a sound. But the questions crowded her throat, tangled too tightly to speak aloud. The man looked toward the horizon, where the sky bruised with gathering clouds. "Bad men move through valley," he said quietly. "They look for places alone, unguarded. Dangerous time for woman here." His words struck her harder than the cold. She wondered if he meant Clive's men or someone worse. Yet his tone did not spark fear, it sparked recognition. He had come not as a threat but as a warning. "Do you know who they are?" she asked, surprised by her own voice. It quivered, but it held. He nodded once. "Not good men. They take what not theirs. Hurt who stand in way." Alara's throat tightened. Her homestead, small and weathered though it was, would be an easy mark for anyone searching for something to claim. She had no family left to defend it. No allies except distant neighbors. And while she had learned resilience, she was only one woman with a rusted rifle and shards of courage stitched together by necessity. "Why tell me?" she whispered. "Because you alone," he said, and something in his tone softened, almost imperceptibly. "Alone should not die for land." She felt the weight of those words settle in her chest like a warm stone. He did not pity her. He simply spoke truth. A truth she had tried to ignore since the first winter stole her parents, and the town forgot she existed, except as a rumor of stubbornness. She stepped forward, careful not to startle him. "What should I do?" He hesitated, gaze drifting toward the line of trees as if listening to voices she could not hear. Then he looked back at her, eyes steady. "Pack your things. Not safe here soon." Her breath caught. "Leave?" This place held every memory she had left. But the certainty in his voice made refusal feel like a fragile thing. "Do you expect me to go with you?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he took one slow step closer. His presence felt like a shield, immense and wordless. Finally, he spoke, voice low as distant thunder. "If you stay, you die. If you come, you live." Alara felt a tremor run through her, not of fear, but of the realization that her fate had already begun shifting the moment he stepped from the trees. The snow around them settled into a heavy stillness, waiting for her choice. She opened her mouth to respond, but a shout echoed faintly from the valley below. Male voices. Several. Growing louder. The man's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the sound, then back at her with urgency flickering beneath his calm exterior. "Too late to think," he said. "They come now." With a single deliberate pull, he drew her away from the open yard and toward the shelter of the porch, positioning himself between her and the approaching voices. His body became a barrier of stone, breath steady, eyes fixed on the distant figures cresting the rise. Alara's heart pounded against her ribs, the world narrowing to the warmth of his hand, and the cold settling in her chest. Whoever those men were, they were not coming to bargain. And he, this stranger, was ready to face them now. The men crested the ridge like a dark tide spilling across the snow, their shouts scattering the quiet that had settled around Alara's homestead. She felt the stranger's hand steady her instinctively, guiding her back toward the shadowed shelter of the porch. His touch carried a warmth starkly at odds with the bitter wind, and for a fleeting moment she felt small, not in the way Clive Merrick once made her feel, but in the way a bird feels sheltered beneath a great cedar. The riders approached with reckless urgency, their boots kicking up plumes of white, their forms blurred by the rising gusts. She recognized Clive at the front, jaw set with the same arrogance he wore like a second skin. His presence cut deeper than she expected. She thought she had buried the bruises he left behind, but seeing him now stirred old hurts back to the surface. Clive raised his hand as if he were some sheriff commanding obedience, though the only authority he carried was the cruelty he mistook for strength. He surveyed the homestead with narrowed eyes, then fixed his stare on her, as though she were still something he owned. Alara felt her pulse quicken, but not from fear of him. The real fear came from the simmering malice in the men behind him, strangers whose hunger was not for her heart, but for whatever they believed they could take without consequence. The stranger beside her, massive, silent, resolute, shifted slightly, placing himself directly in front of her. Snow glinted across his shoulders like scattered ashes. He did not speak, did not gesture, did not reach for a weapon. He simply became a wall between her and the world. Clive dismounted with a practiced ease. "Ilara," he called out, voice curling like smoke. "You shouldn't be out here alone. Dangerous folk wander these parts." His tone feigned concern, but every syllable carried the satisfaction of a man who believed his moment had come. He approached the porch slowly, his boots crunching with each step. "Heard some Apache wanderers been skulking near your land. Thought I'd check in. Be sure you're safe." His gaze shifted toward the stranger, and his smirk faltered. The stranger stood without flinching, muscles coiled but calm, as if weighing Clive not as a threat but as a nuisance blown in by the cold. The stranger spoke then, voice low and steady. "Leave." One word, but it carried a truth Clive could not ignore. Clive's jaw twitched at being dismissed so simply. "This your land?" he demanded. The stranger did not answer. Clive's eyes flicked to Ilara again, searching for the fear he once commanded. But her fear was no longer his to stir. She forced her voice to remain even. "Go home, Clive. You and your men aren't welcome here." It was the first time she had spoken against him in front of others. A small victory, but the weight of it filled her lungs with a fragile courage she had not felt since before winter stole her world. Clive laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You think he can protect you? He's not even armed." He tilted his head, mockingly studying the stranger's bare torso. "What's he going to do, stare us away?" The stranger remained still, though Ilara sensed a tension beneath the surface, something old and dangerous but controlled. One of Clive's men stepped forward, tapping the butt of his rifle against his palm. "We ain't leaving without checking the place. Folks said they saw smoke from here. Thought this land was abandoned." Ilara's heart plunged. This was the truth of it. They weren't here to rescue her. They were here to take whatever they could carry, supplies, land, perhaps even her. Clive raised a hand to quiet his men, though his eyes never left the stranger. "Tell you what," he said slowly. "You step aside. Let us look around. And nobody gets hurt." The stranger took a single step forward, snow shifting beneath his bare feet. "No," he said. The simple defiance hung between them like an iron bell. Clive bristled. "You think you're some kind of hero?" The stranger's gaze remained unreadable. "Not hero. Just not afraid." The words struck Ilara unexpectedly, wrapping around her like a thin blanket against the cold. Clive looked at her again, searching, perhaps for the obedience she once gave him without realizing it. But all he found was resolve. The air thickened. The men behind Clive tightened their grips on their weapons. The stranger subtly moved his body to shield her more completely. Ilara felt her breath tremble as the moment stretched taut. Violence hovered in the space between snowflakes, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite. Then the stranger reached for her hand, not to pull her, not to claim her, but to anchor her. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. She looked at him, startled, and found his expression softened, though determination flickered beneath it. "Pack your things," he murmured, voice just low enough for her alone. "Act like you're mine." Her heart stuttered. The words were not a command, they were a lifeline. She understood instantly. These men would not leave without ruining everything she had, and staying meant losing far more than a homestead. The stranger offered protection through the simplest illusion, the image of belonging. And in a land where appearances often decided fate, such illusions could save lives. Ilara nodded faintly, trusting him more in that breath than she had trusted anyone in years. She stepped back toward the door, and Clive lunged forward instinctively. "Where do you think you're going?" he barked. The stranger shifted again, blocking him with a silent warning that needed no explanation. "She goes," he said. "You stay." Clive's face reddened with humiliation. "You think you can take her?" The stranger shook his head. "Not take. Help." His sincerity rattled Clive far more than any threat could have. Clive spat into the snow. "This isn't over," he growled. "I'll come back. With more men. And when I do, that land will be mine." The stranger didn't react. He waited until Clive and his men mounted their horses and rode off, their shouts fading into the wind. Only when the last echo vanished did the stranger's posture ease. Alara felt her knees weaken with the sudden release of tension. He turned to her, eyes searching her face for fear or regret. "You must leave soon," he said gently. "They return by sundown." She swallowed hard. "Where would I go?" He looked toward the distant mountains, their peaks shrouded in mist. "With me," he answered softly. "My path safe. Safer than here." Alara looked back at her home, the place where she had buried her childhood, her parents, her hopes of belonging. Now it felt like a grave waiting to claim her too. She drew a slow breath, weighed the risk, and found her choice already made. She stepped inside to gather what little she owned. The stranger remained on the porch, watching the horizon with the vigilance of a guardian carved from living stone. As she packed, a strange calm settled inside her, a sense that she was not running away but stepping toward something unknown and necessary. When she returned with a small bag slung over her shoulder, the stranger met her with a steady nod. "We go now," he said. She hesitated only once, glancing back at the homestead. The wind pushed the door closed behind her, as if sealing the past. She turned away. The stranger guided her toward the trees where the world changed shape, where winter deepened into a place she had never dared travel. And just as they reached the first shadowed line of pines, he said quietly, "My name is Tayson." Before she could speak her own, a distant gunshot cracked through the air. Tayson's head snapped toward the valley, eyes sharpening. "They hear early," he whispered. And the forest seemed to hold its breath. Winter clung to the pines like a second skin as Tayson guided Alara deeper into the forest, each step muffled beneath a thick quilt of snow. The gunshot still echoed faintly behind them, a warning stitched into the cold morning air. She followed him without question, though her breath trembled with every exhale. The world felt reborn in strangeness. Taller trees, steeper slopes, shadows that curved like watchful spirits. Yet beside her walked a man carved from certainty, and in his presence fear loosened its grip just enough for her to keep moving. Tayson paused only when the forest grew too dense for the sky to filter through. He lifted a hand, palm broad and silent, signaling her to wait. Listening seemed instinctive to him, as though the earth whispered secrets through the snow, and he had learned its language long before he ever learned hers. Alara hugged her arms to her chest, shivering as a gust of wind snaked through her coat. She watched him, still, alert, shoulders rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. Even in danger, he carried himself with the calm of someone who had endured far worse storms than this one. "Are they close?" she whispered. "Not yet," he said, though worry flickered across his brow. "But they ride fast." Alara swallowed, feeling a hollow ache at the center of her ribs. She thought of the home she had left, the memories she had locked inside it like pressed flowers in an old book. She wondered if she would ever return to it, or if Clive's men had already claimed it as another trophy of their greed. The thought stung, but not as much as the realization that she felt safer here, surrounded by towering trees and unknown paths, than she ever had under a roof she called her own. Tayson glanced back, eyes softening. "You cold?" "I'm all right." He stepped closer, untying the thick fur cloak slung across his shoulder. Without waiting for permission, he draped it around her. The warmth enveloped her instantly, rich with the scent of pine resin and smoke. Her breath caught at the gentleness of the gesture. "Thank you," she murmured. He only nodded, as if kindness needed no acknowledgement. They continued onward, climbing until the incline eased into a ridge overlooking a hidden valley. The land below spread out in sweeping folds of white, broken only by narrow rivers of unfrozen water threading through the terrain. Smoke drifted from a distant cluster of shelters, low sturdy structures arranged in a quiet circle. Alara recognized it as a camp, though nothing like the mining outposts she had seen before. This place felt older, sacred, protected by more than walls. "Your people?" she asked. He nodded once. "Safer here," he said. "They respect you." "Why?" "I'm nobody to them." "Not nobody," he replied softly. "You brave. You endure alone." The words warmed her more than the cloak. She had never considered endurance a kind of strength. She had only known it as survival. Tayson led her down the ridge, and as they neared the camp, two men approached. One tall and lanky with a braid trailing down his back, the other broader with a quiet, assessing gaze. Tayson greeted them briefly in his native tongue. The men's eyes drifted to her, not with suspicion but curiosity. When Tayson introduced her, they dipped their heads respectfully, stepping aside to let her pass. She exhaled slowly, surprised by the welcome. Inside the camp, children darted between shelters, their laughter rising like tiny sparks against the winter gloom. Women tended fires, grinding herbs or stirring pots, pausing only to observe the newcomer with gentle interest. Alara felt herself shrink beneath the attention, but Tayson walked beside her with unwavering calm. "No harm here," he murmured. "You safe?" They approached a lodge near the center of the camp. Warmth billowed from within, carrying the scent of cedar and broth. Tayson held back the flap, allowing her to enter first. The interior glowed with firelight, casting shadows that danced across the woven mats lining the walls. Alara's shoulders loosened for the first time since dawn. She lowered her bag, feeling the strain in her muscles settle into a dull hum. Tayson sat across from her, legs folded, his presence as grounding as the fire crackling between them. "You tired?" "Yes," she admitted, though the word barely touched the depth of it. Fear had drained her. Worry had hollowed her. But beneath it all, something new fluttered, something like trust. "Tell me," he said softly, "why you live alone?" Alara hesitated, fingers twisting in the fur of the cloak. "Because no one ever stayed," she said finally. "My parents died young. Neighbors moved away. Clive," she paused, breath tightening. "Clive made me believe I wasn't worth choosing." Tayson's expression shifted, a flicker of anger tempered by compassion. "Men like him small inside," he said. "They make others small too." A shaky laugh escaped her. "Maybe I let him." "No," Tayson replied firmly. "Hurt people forget their strength. You remember now." His certainty unraveled something she had kept tightly bound. She blinked back sudden tears, stunned by how easily he saw her. Not as fragile, not as a burden, but as someone carving her way through a harsh world with quiet resilience. Before she could speak, a shout rose outside, urgent, sharp. Tayson rose instantly. "Stay here," he said, though his gaze lingered, as if ensuring her safety before the danger even revealed itself. He stepped outside, and Alara followed to the doorway, peering into the gathering dusk. One of the camp scouts approached, breath fogging the air, words tumbling out in hurried fragments. Tayson's jaw hardened. He looked toward the ridge they had crossed earlier, then at her. "Clive's men find trail," he said. "They close." Fear rippled through her, but beneath it lay something stronger. She stepped forward. "What do we do?" Tayson studied her, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "You stay with me," he said. And for the first time, the words did not sound like a warning or a plan. They sounded like a promise. Tayson moved in front of her, his posture shifting from vigilant calm to protective certainty. The camp around them tensed as women gathered children, and men reached for weapons. The air thickened with the knowledge that trouble had arrived sooner than expected. Alara felt her breath catch as the wind flung icy flakes across her face, each one carrying the echo of riders pushing closer through the trees. In the charged stillness, Tayson glanced back at her, resolve etched into his features. "Stay behind me," he said, voice steady. "Do not leave my side." She nodded, heart pounding not only from fear but from the strange comfort of trusting someone she barely knew. Then the first rider burst through the treeline, and the world held its breath. In that instant, Alara sensed fate tightening around them, drawing her deeper into Tayson's unfolding winter world ahead. Snow churned beneath the hooves of Clive's riders as they surged into the clearing, their silhouettes slicing through the dimming light like jagged shadows torn from the earth. The camp erupted in motion, warriors taking positions, women pulling children back toward the shelters, but Tayson did not move from where he stood before Alara. His presence, tall and grounding, drew the world into a single point of stillness. Alara felt her heartbeat thrum against her ribs, each pulse a reminder that she was no longer merely a witness to danger. She was part of its center. Clive dismounted first, boots slamming into the snow with practiced arrogance. His gaze scanned the camp before settling on her with a twisted triumph. "Thought you could hide behind them?" he sneered. "Didn't know you had it in you." Tayson angled his body, shielding her. "Leave," he said, voice low, edged with warning. Clive laughed, sharp and humorless. "Everything out here is mine if I want it. Including her homestead. Including her." His eyes flicked to Alara. "You always were trouble." Alara stepped forward. "I don't belong to you." Clive's smile faltered. "You think this changes what you owe? I offered you a future." "She owes you nothing," Tayson said. The men behind Clive raised their rifles. Tension cracked across the clearing like ice under weight. Tayson lifted a hand, one signal, and his people drew their bows, forming a silent ring of protection. Clive barked a bitter laugh. "These savages don't scare me." "They should," Alara said softly. "Because you never learned to listen." Clive swung his rifle upward. Tayson moved before the motion finished. He knocked Clive's arm aside. A gunshot cracked. Snow exploded near her feet. Warriors surged, but Tayson lifted his palm, commanding restraint. Clive stumbled, shock cutting through his rage. Tayson had spared him. "You don't get to choose how this ends," Clive spat. Tayson stepped between the muzzle and the camp, unarmed. "I choose peace. But I'm not afraid to fight." Clive's grip trembled. "You think she wants you?" he barked. "She runs to the strongest man." Alara felt doubt flicker, but Tayson didn't look back at her. "She choose her path," he said. "Not yours. Not mine." Clive lunged again, but Tayson seized the barrel and wrenched it free, throwing it across the clearing. The warriors advanced, forcing Clive's men back. "You'll regret this," Clive shouted as he fled. Silence settled heavy after they vanished. Alara exhaled shakily, knees weakening. Tayson turned to her immediately. "You hurt?" "No," she whispered. "Just shaken." "You safe now?" he said gently. "Safe." The word trembled inside her. When she looked at Tayson, something deeper stirred, something warm and frightening. He guided her back to the lodge. Firelight welcomed them with soft crackles. She sank onto the furs, letting her breath steady. Tayson knelt beside her. "I sorry you see violence," he murmured. "I wanted bring you here for peace." "You protected me," she said. "You risked everything." "Not risk. Choice." She met his gaze, the fire outlining the tenderness hidden within his strength. Something inside her shifted. "Tayson," she whispered, "why do you care what happens to me?" He hesitated, then spoke with quiet truth. "I care because I see you. Strong. Kind. Lonely too long." Her breath caught. "I watch you in winter," he said gently. "To be sure you live. Something in you." He pressed his chest lightly. "Call to me." Emotion rose within her, warm and sharp. Tayson's voice softened further. "I want you stay with me. Not for safety. Because my heart choose you." Alara felt tears sting, not from fear but from the unfamiliar weight of being cherished. She reached for his hand. "Tayson," she whispered, trembling. "I choose you too." Before their hands touched, a thunderous crack split the night, a gunshot, closer than any before. Tayson's eyes hardened. "They return." The sound rolled through the camp like a wave of ice, silencing every voice. Tayson rose in one motion, reaching for the knife at his belt. Outside, scouts shouted warnings from the tree line. Alara stood too, though her legs trembled. Clive had returned far sooner than either of them expected. Tayson moved to the doorway, then turned back to her. "Stay behind me," he said, voice firm yet gentle. She stepped close enough to feel his warmth, drawing strength from it. He touched her arm briefly, reassurance passing between them like a spark. They stepped into the storm-lit dusk. Snow swirled as riders pushed through the pines, more than before. Clive rode at the front, rage twisting his features. This was no longer pride. This was vengeance sharpened into intent. Tayson descended the steps, placing himself wholly between Alara and the threat. Warriors closed in behind him, bows drawn, movements precise. Alara felt their unity, but fear still curled in her chest. Clive raised his rifle. "You think you can take her from me?" he shouted. "Humiliate me?" Tayson's voice carried a calm that only enraged Clive further. "She choose her own path." Clive's horse stamped furiously. "She has no path without me." Alara found her voice, thin but true. "I choose him. And I choose myself." Clive's roar shattered the air. He fired. Tayson pulled Alara behind him as the shot cracked. The bullet tore into his shoulder, staggering him. Alara cried out, reaching for him, but he lifted his hand, refusing to fall. Pain flickered over his features, yet his eyes burned with devotion. "I stand," he said through clenched teeth. "For her." The warriors surged forward, arrows poised. In that suspended moment, as snow spiraled between the living and the furious, Alara felt something inside her settle with startling clarity. She moved to Tayson's uninjured side, gripping his arm as though anchoring both of them. Whatever storm rushed toward them, she would face it beside him. No more running. No more silence. Only the fierce, undeniable truth rising between their hearts now.